Okay, first I'm going to start by talking about me, one of my favourite topics. So I'm Professor of Public Transport at Monash University, Australia. I direct a group called the Public Transport Research Group. I'm a little bit unusual as a professor because I'm industry chair. And I'm quite engaged with industry. I've been funded by industry since the last 20 years. So most professors are university academics, funded by the university. I'm funded by industry to be a professor. I do a lot of international work. I've been the chair of the Light Rail Transit Committee at the US Transportation Research Board for the last 7 years. And I'm an advisor on lots of countries, Sweden, Singapore. My background is in consulting. I was a strategic consultant on big transit projects around the world for many years. And then before that, I was a network planner in the United Kingdom for Transport for London and then on light railway projects. So I've been a professor for 20 years. And at this stage, according to my publication rate, I publish more in this field than anybody else in the world, by volume anyway. The group I run, the Public Transport Research Group, are entirely funded by industry, mostly in Victoria, Australia, the Public Transport Corporation, but also the rail operator, which is actually the Hong Kong rail operator at the moment, NTL, Transdev, big French group, the Bus Association of Victoria, Yarra Trams, Keolis French tram operator, and the Road Authority, Vic Roads. So we've been going for 20 years where I work for the authority on very practical issues. Key initiatives, we have been running the largest PhD project jointly with industry called SEPTGRIP, the Sustainable Effective Public Transport Graduate Research Industry Program, where we had 18 PhD students, which I think is about the same size as you guys. They were all funded by industry. And an important part about that is it's very cross-disciplinary. We had people from science, arts, as well as engineering, design, health and medical, as well as accident research, crash researchers. Also, the research I do is extremely cross-disciplinary. We work on all facets of projects, and we deal with all the different. I've got a group of about 56 researchers in my group, and they include, artists, as well as designers, as well as scientists, in very diverse areas, because we're dealing with human beings in public transport. And human beings need a lot of different types of science to understand them. In addition, I see it as my job to help industry. We run the world database of all public transport research. It's called World Transit Research. It's free to use, and it has all of the publications since it became electronic on it. There's over 9,000. You can log in at worldtransitresearch.info. It's all free to use, and we have over 500,000 users around the world in about 8,000 towns and cities using it. The idea is to break down the barrier between practitioners working in the real world, consultants, students, and research publications. Also, this database has generated a format and structure for knowledge in the field. And we have a free bi-monthly newsletter because in the last 10 years, publications in this field has grown from an average of one per day. Every day there's a new publication of public transport. Now we've got about 2. And the big growth has been in China and Asia. Also, we run a podcast series called Researching Transit. It's all available on iTunes and all of the various platforms. It's free to use. It's interviews with the top researchers in the field. So if you are interested in the field and you hear the name of a famous person, they've been interviewed by us. You can get to know them and what affected their career. A lot of students like it because it tells stories about what their career was like to get where they were. think that's it. And I move on to our first presentation. So I'm going to talk, my first of the two topics is a big research program we have on the long-term effects of autonomous cars on land use, access and travel. So this paper overviews progress in this research program. We aren't finished, we literally only just started. The program is funded by the Australian Research Council. These are very hard to get grants in the Discovery program of the Australian Research Council. It's a collaboration between myself, Professor Currie, and Associate Professor Mohammed Leighton Kamrazaman, who's one of the up-and-coming land use planning academics in the world. He's actually top in Australia and doing very well internationally. Great thinker about how land use and transport interact with each other. And fundamentally, a new thing about him is he's very quantitative, because most land use planners are quite not quantitative, so they don't tend to rely on data much. The program funds two PhD students, Fuad Huda and Alan Pimenta. We recruited them after a very wide, it's a very prestigious project. So I'm going to talk about the research program, what we're trying to achieve, two aspects of results we have to date. One is about the value of time, and the other is about land use effects, and then about the future, the next steps in the program. So the research program aims to explore the long-term effects of autonomous cars on land use, access and travel. The key objectives are to understand the value of time with autonomous vehicles in order to derive generalized cost functions and accessibility calculations. Value of time is one of the most important aspects of transport modes out there. It determines all modeling, because all modeling is about skims, generalized costs. It's the valuation of travel time savings, and also all of the wider effects of using one mode compared to another. So it's almost a critical variable in all transport planning of all modes, to be honest. And it will be very important about autonomous vehicles. The other second objective is we're going to model the induced land use effects of urban growth and changes to urban form, resulting from policy and AVs, how they influence that. So the land use, the type of changes that land use make, a very important topic. And then when we've done these two factors, we're going to calibrate a land use transport model to explore the types of impacts that they will have together. Our theoretical context is that there's a feedback cycle between land use and the activity and travel patterns that we have, the changes in accessibility resulting from AVs, they'll change patterns and also the activity. It's a kind of circular effect, very common in land use transport research. Already in some theoretical work in autonomous vehicles, it's recognized there are sort of direct effects and then secondary impacts over time. We've heard about supposed safety benefits, although there are plenty of people getting killed by these things at the moment, and vehicle operations and personal mobility effects, generation of travel. And it's recognized that in the long term, these effects will accumulate to create different land uses in cities. And that's what the research is about. What is that effect going to be? Now, an important point about autonomous vehicles in this research is it's entirely theoretical, because we really don't have any. We have some pilot vehicles that look very shiny and nice, but they're a long way from reality. And so we are kind of doing this research in a way to explore possible futures when we actually don't have these sorts of modes in operation at any scale that can tell us what they're going to be like. So very theoretical research. Our framework to understand the research was that basically we're expecting changes in the value of time because of the fact that the vehicle, we can actually do activities in vehicles, much like we can in trains. you can tend to work and do other things. So we're expecting to have a lot of utility benefits from which will result in the value of time being less for using these vehicles. That will change the generalized cost and change accessibility effects. Commonly, when value of time is reduced, people will travel further, for example. They will relocate. They will make long-term decisions about their life where they can move further away, and that will increase travel. There'll also be induced travel effects because suddenly a whole market out there who can't use cars because they can't drive, they don't have cars, can suddenly travel again. So this will increase travel, and it'll disperse the origins and destinations that people go to. It'll change the attractiveness of public transport, both positive and negative. There'll be some induced travel, which will have congestion effects, and these will all change land use drivers. The two big factors in all of this, two big questions are, what's the value of time of autonomous vehicles? And what are the land use effects going to be? Now, research in this field is all new. You're probably all working on it now. So we really don't know the answers to all of these questions. But it's been going for a good 10 years. And our approach in all of this has been to start by just asking where we are in the evidence that's out there. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to talk about the value research that we've done, the value of time, and then I'm going to move on to the land use research. Now, the value project started with a meta-synthesis of AV and value of time estimates. If you don't know what a meta-synthesis is, it's a technical terminology for a literature review, but a literature review where you assemble quantitative data from sources. And then you try to understand that data in some kind of pattern to understand patterns and trends and influences on this. The project aimed to do a synthesis, bring all the evidence together, of the estimated value of time of autonomous vehicles through a meta-analysis of all the different publications, different technical societal factors that have affected that research, geography where it was published, what they were looking at, the methodologies that were used. This has all been published now, literally a few weeks ago, in Transport Reviews, so it's all available for you to have a look at. We open access all our papers, so they're all free to have a look at. The methodology was a systematic literature review. Those of you that have almost certainly done literature reviews should be aware that there is actually a vast array of methodologies for literature reviews. This is the systematic review approach, which adopts well-defined search terminologies and search protocols to undertake the work. We searched on a whole series of terminologies to find articles. We reduced duplication. We undertook some snowballing, which is we look at the publications to see if we can find anything else. We find the unique articles. We work out which ones qualify to our criteria that have actually got estimates we can use. And in the end, we found a total of 24 research papers have been undertaken so far in this field to estimate the value of time. So we have a database of values. There's 24 papers, but I think there's something like 300 separate values were identified because some projects do more than one value. And we compile this in a database and then we normalize them. Why do we normalize them? Because some of those values are from China, some are from North America, some are from Sweden. Some were, I think we've got the papers here. There they are there. Some were quite early, 2016, some were late, 2022. And what you have to do is we get different values in different currencies over different years, okay? And the problem is the values differ according to countries and currencies. So what we did is we adopted the normalization approach using the OECD's Purchasing Price Power Parities. PPP, Purchasing Power Parities, because the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development publishes indices of all currencies for every year and how they compare against each other. And that can be cross-referenced to get values that are the same equivalency for the year you're interested in. It affects for inflation and also currency variations. And we did this and converted all the values to equivalent values, which were in Australian dollars in 2021. And after that, we had a whole database of values and we asked ourselves, what does it all tell us about the value of time of autonomous vehicles? These are the values. You can already see, these are 24 papers, lots of different countries involved, different years. They were all mostly from state of preference studies. Why? Because you've got no choice. You can't ask people what the value of time of using an autonomous vehicle is now because no one's really using them, not in any scale. So we have to use a state of preference methodology where we present to them the idea and ask them what they think their values would be. So it's very speculative. And indeed, the way we present to them varies, as you'll see. Some people present their autonomous vehicles by saying, this is an autonomous car, it will take you from here to there in written text. Some people provide a video with the most glamorous young people getting in this car, all wearing suits and looking immaculate, and it's always sun shining. And they get in this beautiful autonomous car, which looks really clever and beautiful. And they sit there and read books and things like that. And that's supposed to be reality. They use videos. Some people actually have their equivalent is, imagine there was a chauffeur for your car who was driving the car. And that's how they get people to imagine what it's like. A bit more real and realistic, if you like. But of course, the person wouldn't really be there in reality. They've mostly covered private and shared. Some studies have looked at pooled autonomous vehicles. These are where, say we are all going to the airport, we'd all get in the same car, or other people, you're going many origins to one destination. It's where you're sharing the trip to the same place. But most others have looked at shared, which is going to multiple destinations with other people. Okay, these are the values we found. We found a whole bunch of values. We're able to identify for various contexts what I call disaggregate factors because of the way we assembled the database. For each of these factors, we looked at different countries where they'd been estimated. These are how many they are, whether they're rural or urban, how they'd gone about demonstrating the AV approach to people. The sample size, sample characteristics. Trader and non-trader is where if you ask them to take part in this, that they would actually trade, or some surveys actually get an estimated value of time for people who actually don't want to take part in it. And that's another way, that's what we call trader, non-trader. Commuting, AM peak travel, distance, trip duration, lots of factors. These are what we call the disaggregate factors. And we can look at the data and see if these values vary by these groups. And that's the purpose of the analysis. So what are the values? This is the box plots of all the ranges of the values explored. We had 81 separate values, all normalized, around an equivalent of $11 Australian in 2021. If you want to know what $11 is, it's about 9,586 yuan. Okay, I did a quick calculation for you yesterday. So private AVs, $11, there's 81 values. Shared AVs, where anybody can use it rather than your own personal car, $12.30. It's higher, implying that the lower value of time is the benefit. People prefer that. People will prefer to travel at the lowest cost. So already, it's quite clear that private AVs, your own vehicle, is going to be preferred to shared vehicles, okay? With other people, strangers, can use that vehicle. Pooled AVs, there's not that much evidence of this. This is where you're all going as a group to somewhere, was $17, quite a big difference. Transit AVs, this is where, and of course, people don't realize this. They keep on thinking cars, AVs, but the dominant autonomous vehicle on planet Earth in land transport is public transport. It's the line in Seoul, entirely autonomous. Shanghai Metro, Singapore Metro, you know, in fact, around the world, we've got billions of people using AVs every day, but they're all in public transport. Yeah. So transit AVs are dominant worldwide at the moment. Might always be. Anyway, the value of that was $22. Then the private car, a lot of these studies made estimates for other vehicles to look at mode shift, the behaviors that people might do in transport models. Your private car was $12.60, which if you look carefully, you'll see these two are cheaper than the private car, implying people would prefer to use those on average. Transit, $14. This is not autonomous transit, it's usual transit globally, predominated by the bus. $14. Again, AVs would be better. And then at last, train services. We had 3 people just estimated for trains. For some reason, it's got a very high value of time for those. So those are the sorts of ranges of values. And now you might see this box plots here, you know, around the distributions, and then there's some real outliers. You might say, well, why, Graham? Why does all this evidence scatter so much? Go and talk to some researchers and you'll understand why. Because everybody's got different assumptions. They've got different ways of handling data, and you should expect that. That's the real world. If everybody had the same data point, I wouldn't believe it, okay? So scatter should be expected. You know, we're looking at 24 studies from loads of different countries. It's what happens. And the contexts are different. You know, anything that we measure objectively in 10 different places gets very different values. Okay, so that's the ranges of values. When you compare the modes against each other, there's differences in the value of time. This is a matrix of differences. The green values are statistically significant, and these values aren't. And what it tells me, and these are percentages of value of time differences, from private AVs, you know, everybody basically has their private car and is now going to be autonomous. It's a 10% benefit over sharing the vehicle. It's a 36% benefit over group travel in these things. It's a 51% benefit over autonomous public transport. It's a 13% benefit over private car, 22% over transit, and 53% over trains. Okay. Shared AVs, multiple destinations, compared to pooled AVs, a 28% benefit and a 45% benefit over autonomous transit. The implication being, in the future, these values prove true, most autonomous vehicles be private. Which means your highly congested cities full of one driver in a car which is driven by the driver is likely to be replaced by an autonomous vehicle carrying one driver and would be just as congested. Okay, now we were able to look at these explanatory factors and understand which of these are more significant in explaining the values of time we got. Basically, all of these ones were significant. We didn't find a link between gender and AV estimates or trip time. Okay. So vehicle type, value of time is lowest for private AVs. Private ownership of AVs looks likely. There were differences by country. The value of time was seen to be lower in Germany and the Netherlands than in Australia and the United States. Don't quite know why. It could be a wealth issue. By geographical location, rural had lower value of time than urban, but that's often related to income. I'll come to this one later. Sample sizes, the value of time was higher for samples of more than 500, which means, is that more correct or is it just wrong? In general, the rule is you get better data from bigger samples. And what we found is sample size, if you have a big sample, your value of time grows. So maybe that's better If you want to have a low value of time for autonomous vehicles, don't have a very big sample size, and you'll get a lower estimate. That is very bad science. You're trying to derive an answer by fiddling the results. Probably higher sample size is better. If you include non-traders, people who are not interested in autonomous vehicles, you'll get a lower value of time. If you commuters will always experience better benefits, lower value of time for autonomous vehicles. Also the peak because of commuters. Okay, there's a few others there. We found one interesting thing is people that have a driving license now tend to have lower values of time estimates, implying that if you know how to drive and you're involved in driving, you kind of appreciate the benefits of autonomous driving more than if you didn't drive. This was one of the key problem results, which was significant. We found that if the way you demonstrate to the respondent autonomous cars affects the answer. If you wrote it, you get a value of 15. You wrote some text and they had to read the text. If you did a fancy video with glamorous people and the sun shining, none of those videos ever show it raining. Have you noticed that? Is that because in Korea it never rains? Maybe? Not too sure that's true. But in other words, if you make it artificially look incredibly fantastic, people will believe you and they'll give you a lower value of time. Whether that's real or good science is another matter. And interestingly, the lowest value we got was when they give an anecdote of an imaginary chauffeur driving your car. So yes, if you want to fiddle the results and do bad science, then just get yourself a nice animation video that doesn't look real, that nearly looks fantasy world. Now, when I think of autonomous cars, and I look at the images that are on the media, are they all real or are they fantasy looking vehicles? I think they're all fantasy looking vehicles that are a long way from our reality. So what's going on at the moment is the media is lying to us. Okay, now new research, this is coming out this year. Because we've got all these data values, we can run meta regressions. The paper we published, we didn't quite get to that yet. We've done the meta regressions, they were significant. And basically what this does is, for each one of those factors, we knew that the values were statistically different. We tested them with t-tests. But the thing is there might be interaction effects between all the factors. So we did a meta regression which accounts for that. And what this found was, we got a R squared of 0.61, pretty good. And what it says is basically these ones are all significant. The big values are rural urban, divide, often to do with the income differences. High income people have tend to have a higher value of time because income and value of time is related. Other values that are high, whether you've got a license or not, tends to decrease the value of time because you understand the value of not driving. Animated videos, these are these silly marketing efforts to make these things look better than they really are, make a big difference, as does the difference between the modes. Relative to private AVs, these values are higher for shared, pooled and transit. So that's the first bit of the project. It gives us some absolutely outstanding data to base our values of time on. Our next step will be to adopt these bias factors and account for them in a survey to make our own estimates. Probably an SP survey. The other side of the project so far is land use. This project also has been published. We've only been going a year, but we've got 2 publications already. And we published this study in Transport Reviews, which was again a meta review, systematic review of the field of land use and how it relates to research in autonomous vehicles. We're actually looking for conceptual ideas in this. The aim was to understand factors affecting built form, processes where land use will be changed by autonomous vehicles and what they create. Was kind of looking for smoking guns, if you like, for things that might influence land use. We use something called causal loop diagrams. You'll see them soon. These are, we have all the aspects of land use and how they link to each other. I'll show you them soon, you'll get the idea. Quite a lot of work was done. This was led by Alan Pimenta. Same approach, systematic literature review, lots of terms here to sort these out. Poor Alan started with 1,800 papers and finally got down to 82 papers, which had some substantive evidence, including modelling of likely land use effects. I must say this was a much harder job, because what is land use? It's very diverse, lots of different fields. There's lots of technical modelling. There's transport modelling, there's land use modelling, which is actually another field of it. We undertook the terms. We extracted from the database of papers 6 sets of built environment factors. I'll talk about them in a second. From that, we were trying to identify things that were affecting each other. What was influencing about AVs and how it was affecting land use. We created these causal loop diagrams which show cause and effect, directions of effect. We even tried to measure effect size. And we disaggregated the results by private AVs, public AVs, or shared AVs. And also we were interested in CBD locations, because early on in the review, it became quite clear that some of the biggest effects of autonomous vehicles are going to be on city centres. And then we're looking at suburban. The built environment factors we're interested in. These are sort of based off the 3Ds of Robert Cervero, density, diversity, design. But we expanded it very, very early to start by looking at parking, because it became actually very clear that parking was actually super influential on this. And what's interesting is it's not widely understood. In fact, this research has found so many gaps in the literature. I do think that teams of people like you in this room will be researching aspects of this for years to come yet. Parking, we were interested in how it affected the number of spaces per household, the size of parking. Destination accessibility, which is how easy it is to get to places. Jobs in residential. Urban density, distance to the CBD, which is a sprawl measure. Sprawl has been widely associated with autonomous vehicles and the discussion about them. Diversity of land use, very important, whether this will change. And then the design of the built form in cities. And as you'll see, no one's really thought about this yet, which is rather important because it could probably be critical. So what did we find? I'm going to go through them. They're very wordy, but there's lots of ideas in this. And indeed, putting this presentation together for you helped me think through these ideas more. And I've managed to do a bit of a synthesis. So you're going to get to see some new work I did literally for you, which will affect our thinking. What about parking? AVs completely expected to significantly reduce the demand for parking. 2 drivers, reduce car ownership. If you have an autonomous vehicle, do you need 2 cars? Or can one of those vehicles do the work of your household? If you're using shared autonomous vehicles, you don't need a car. You can just call it up. You don't need to have a car for yourself. So there's a strong view that car ownership will reduce. If there's less cars, there's less parking requirements. The second big factor that's going to reduce parking is that they're capable of dropping you off and then going somewhere else on their own, okay? Because that's what cities really need. When I look at this holiday island of Zhujiao, this holiday island, all I see is traffic congestion everywhere, okay? And what this island really needs is more cars with nobody in them to add to the traffic stream. That will really solve your problems, yes. So these vehicles, autonomous vehicles, are able to drive around on their own, okay? The environmental implication of having cars driving around with nobody in them hasn't been thought about, but that's likely to be what they can do. So they can drive you to the parking lot or your workplace, drop you off, and then they can drive themselves off to a parking space. Now, why would they drive in a CBD to an expensive parking space? That will not happen. There was no logic to do it. what you'd do is you'd either get it to drive all the way back to your house, which doubles the length of commuting by car in cities, okay? I hope you realize this is a stupid idea for the future, but nevertheless, if we have autonomous cars, it's like a thing that could happen. So your car can then go back to your house, okay? If it's a privately owned car, it can go back to the house and your wife or your partner might be able to use it. Or maybe parking will restructure in cities. Instead of a vastly expensive parking lot in vastly expensive CBD locations, maybe the parking people will sell that land and then relocate parking lots to the edge of cities so that the cars go to those lots. Really, there's a whole new dynamic of where we can put parking. Okay. Now, the implication of all this is fundamental. In American cities, there's some great graphics that show this, but American cities, we've lost the, you'll see that almost half of all land in American cities is parking. So if we can suddenly not have that land and it could be used for something else, these cities still have valuable land that people would like to use, then it's quite feasible that that land could then be used for other purposes. And so a vast difference could occur to cities. Or another aspect of that is maybe we need more parking in suburban contexts. We have a slow pause while the technical issues. Of course, with autonomous cars, technical issues will never happen. And you might like to think what the implications of having an entirely autonomous system is. If there's a glitch in the system, already people are being killed because the autonomous car didn't recognize a white van and they thought it was the sky. So I'm a bit dubious about the safety benefits. Remarkably with parking, the evidence that's produced so far is so limited, but the strong evidence is that that's been published is that shared autonomous vehicles might reduce parking in city centres, and nobody's yet actually done any work on private autonomous vehicles in city centres, which is surprising because that's almost certainly going to be the biggest effect. Because at the moment, in large CBDs, I was in Seoul a few days ago, most of the parking is commuters and they own their cars, and as you'll see, the value of time of autonomous cars is lowest for private, so they're just going to go and buy a vehicle that can drive itself. Yeah, there's lots of gaps. That's one of the gaps, is possibly one of the biggest effect on parking, yet hasn't been associated with private AVs. Thank you. We're back in operation. Now there is another factor here. There's a couple of other amazing things coming out of this. Not only will there be a whole bunch of effects on land use in city centres, because suddenly all this land will be available, but in addition, if buildings are no longer required to have parking, the costs of the building will likely reduce by 20 to 25% has been the estimate. So suddenly, constructing buildings gets cheaper. Okay, that's going to have quite a big economic effect on the economy, and it will also make building larger buildings in city centres more viable, which again makes me think land use in city centres is likely to change quite a lot. There's one proviso in this. Some of the research says we're likely to actually maybe increase car ownership for private autonomous vehicles. Why? Because when the unit costs are getting less and less for running these things, they may become more attractive to buy, which could increase car ownership. You see, there is a latent demand for travel amongst people who haven't got cars and also who can't drive. And suddenly, if you could afford these vehicles and they can drive you, it could increase car ownership. So some people say, well, this effect of reduced car ownership, reducing parking, could actually be the other way around. And literally there's a debate about it. One last thing about parking. fantastic part about this is, in reality, if you've ever designed a car park, a parking lot, you would know that there are standards for the amount of access space for the car to get in and out, the space from the doors of the vehicles to get them open so passengers can get in and out, which means your parking spaces have to be quite wide. Now with autonomous vehicles, you don't need that at all. Those cars' doors will never open. They will drive themselves in, and you can get a higher density of cars into car parking lots. In fact, when you think about it, you don't really need to have them flat. You can put them on their ends. You need a technology to do that. Just you can really condense the space. So there's another aspect about this. Not only do we need less car parking, or we can relocate the parking, the space that we might need for that might be less. Destination accessibility. Now, the big issue here about destination accessibility is the evidence suggests we're expecting to get improvements in value of time, reductions in that value of time, which will make us drive further. The evidence is quite clearly that private autonomous vehicles will have the biggest effect, particularly on CBDs, than shared autonomous. Why? Why is it different? Shared autonomous will be slower. You'll be picking other people up. And people do not like in confined spaces being with strangers. So the accessibility changes in studies have been lower for shared compared to private. So private autonomous tend to benefit suburban accessibility more as well. What about urban density? Right, here's the picture. Residential and employment densities in city centres and suburbs will be affected by this. Reductions in parking spaces means that city centres can have more activities, because one of the most unproductive uses of land is a car park. Okay, it's not a very, I don't want to live next to a car park. I don't want to live in a car park. It is not a very nice place. Getting rid of them is quite a good thing. And you know, the value of this land, its economic activity is still there. So it's very likely that residential commercial densities will get better, particularly in inner areas. Interestingly, those of you looking for a PhD topic, okay, none of the modelling studies that have actually looked at this have ever looked at the contribution to urban density of replacement of parking. Okay, so it's a gaping hole for research. Someone needs to do that. You might ask yourself, so what have they been doing? Yeah, I think the truth is parking hasn't really been thought of in a lot of this yet. Early days. Land use diversity, sorry for all of the words. So CBD parking reduction will get new uses involved in city centres. Lots of other views, certainly a view that more activity could occur in suburban areas because they're easier to get to now. So the view that commercial land in suburban areas might get bigger. A simulation study in Seoul found that commercial land use areas may significantly decrease with fully autonomous shared autonomous vehicles, whereas industrial and residential land use tend to largely increase. So some conflict between what researchers are saying. Now, Laura Cockelman's been, some of her research has suggested, in practice, how we go about autonomous vehicles is very unclear. But one way we might get progress is by adopting them in particular locations where we can manage the road space. What they call single-use zones, often for one particular purpose, you know, factories or something. And if that was the case and we managed to get them to work there, obviously the diversity is not going to be very good, because it's going to be one sort of land use. It's also been suggested that land use will become obsolete as a result of this. And some idea that new land uses will occur, okay, which I think will help diversity. So I hope you see I'm going up and down here with diversity. We're going to get less, we're going to get more. We don't know. The new land uses, by the way, is we're going to need charging stations. These vehicles can't keep on going around there on their own. As I say, it's extremely likely from this evidence that unless it's managed, most autonomous vehicles will be privately owned. And if they're privately owned and you're out there in the world, you will have to stop the vehicle to recharge it, like a charging station, like a garage. Garages won't be needed anymore, so that's going to be reducing land uses. But the idea that you're charging for half an hour, 20 minutes at a stop means that you might do other things at that stop, and that could become an attractive place to be. You know, you could be doing coffee, shopping, something like that. Distance to the CBD, well, almost every study says it's going to increase. We're going to get home relocations and sprawl. Modelling results also show that distance to CBD will over increase. One study's 8% increase in travel distances. Different automation levels might change this in some studies. What about urban design? Now, this is the most unknown area so far, because this is so far into the future. We haven't thought about how we're going to do this yet. It's so immature, this field, it's hard to believe. And what I mean by that is that this is a classic visualization, because the field's dominated with it, because we have no reality yet to talk about. It's a realization of intersection weaving, because one of the benefits of AVs is theoretically said to be the vehicles will not have to stop at intersections, okay, because they can weave between each other. So we get this nice, beautiful intersection, looks like that. Now, a real truth, unfortunately, is with an intersection like that, how are you going to cross the road? See, someone hasn't really thought about that yet. Because one of the strange things about cities, I don't know if you've noticed this, but cities have got human beings in them. And human beings don't all live on one side of the road. They actually occasionally walk across the other side of the road. And that gets in the way of all this traffic. Of course, luckily, half of that traffic will have nobody in them, because those cars will be relocating. But people will have to cross the road somehow. Now, one solution is to grade separate. Okay. It's expensive, and it'll be particularly expensive to do it down every single street of every single city in South Korea. Okay. In fact, it'll probably take the national economy's value for a good 20, 30 years for you to redesign this entire country to do that. So what's going to happen is nothing. It's not going to happen like that. So this idea is ludicrous. It hasn't thought about what real humans are. So we need an urban design solution. It's very likely to involve segregation of the right-of-way, like a tram. Otherwise, it will not be safe. And so this is one view of the world. This is another view of the world from artists who are saying, well, you know, yeah, we won't have humans anymore. We'll just have these vehicles running up and down. So when you look at the research on urban design, it's all over the place. We have no real idea how the built form will change. Now, this is the graphic I put together from having done this presentation. This is new. It's not in any of our published work yet. None of the research team has seen it yet. I did it in my hotel room a few days ago. There are differences between private and public and shared. But basically, the big ones are parking is likely to decrease with reduced car ownership and empty cruising. These are quite big effects. But there might be a slight increase if there's some increased car ownership. And in fact, these here are the real drivers of change. Big one is reduced value of time, causing sprawl. It'll increase CBD destination access, which means that people will work further away. And if you look at the range of estimates from values, they're substantially bigger than shared or autonomous vehicles. And also increased density in suburban areas, but increased distance accessibility in suburban areas, which will have a negative effect on density as sprawl continues. Density, suburban may increase in some areas. CBD distance as well will increase. Here's another one, induced travel. This actually wasn't in any research, but if we induce more travel, that will also increase parking. Because if we have this 10, 20% of the market who can't traveling, well, suddenly need vehicles, and they might need parking. Reduced CBD parking will improve density in city centres because all of that vacant land will become used. Home relocation as a result of reduced value of time will increase distance away from the CBD, which will be a factor influencing sprawl. Pedestrian access and street design in cities, we don't know. No one's really seriously looking at that because this is where the hammer hits the nail. We've got these nice theoretical, imaginary operational vehicles. No one wants to think about the real world implications, although that's where they're going to have to operate. And that's where a huge amount of work is needed. The other land uses, maybe new land uses, will improve diversity. A bit of a different picture for the shared autonomous vehicles. Shared autonomous vehicles have got many more characteristics which are good for cities. Because effectively, individual car ownership is not very good for the future of growth of cities. In particular, car ownership and congestion, environmental impacts. But sharing vehicles, like public transport vehicles, for example, are very useful for cities because it's very efficient, space efficient, and you can give them priority and so forth. And there is an interesting question. If there are many benefits for shared compared to private, why not have policy approaches which benefit this mode compared to that? And so, yes, we will get increased sprawl as a result of destination accessibility improvements, density declines in suburban areas, diversity improvements, but they won't be as big as for private. Okay. Next, we created all these diagrams, which are looking at interaction effects. This is for central business districts. There's 3 central business districts, suburban areas, cities as a whole. Private autonomous vehicles, shared autonomous vehicles, in a combination of the 2. Black, what we've got there is a whole series of built environment factors. And this is all for the CBD. The black lines means this is a well-established, known influence. That, employment density acts to increase network density. Residential densities decrease street network densities. Parking areas decrease residential densities because no one wants to live there. Parking areas decrease commercial land use areas. They get dense. Employment density improves accessibility. So now the red areas here are things we don't know. We don't know how private autonomous vehicles will influence intersection density. No one's done any research on street network density in private autonomous vehicles. No one's done any work on private autonomous vehicles in the CBD and parking area, yet that's likely to be the biggest single effect out of all of this, certainly in our time. I can't believe the parking industry doesn't know this. It's almost like the biggest thing affecting their entire future. There are yellow ones here as well. Yellow ones are where one study said one thing and the other study said another, where there's conflicting views. And if you know much about research, conflicting views is excellent research context because you can quote both guys and say there's obviously a gap in knowledge here. This is for suburban areas, for private autonomous vehicles, shared and groups. Again, lots of red on things we don't seem to understand. And then there's the use of private autonomous vehicles in the suburbs and residential density. Some people have said it will increase and some people have said it will decrease density. And some people have said it will decrease or decrease accessibility in suburban areas. And then we have these as a whole. I won't go through them all. What are we doing? There's also gaps. These are all the gaps we identified. I won't go through them all. There are no quantitative studies on AV impacts on intersection density. In city centres and suburbs, it's unknown if AVs will impact commercial land uses. People literally haven't done the work yet. No quantitative results of private autonomous vehicles and city centre parking. Like, we haven't started doing the research yet. And there's plenty of examples of divergent results. What are we doing next in this study? We are heading off to do our next step, which is going to be, we've done the work on value, synthesizing value of time estimates. We've done the work on land uses, you've seen that. We are now heading towards a state of preference study, adopting the learnings from the meta studies we did to more accurately measure value of time for a future AV scenario. We won't be using glamorous photographs in videos of people getting in AVs. We'll be trying to do that in a much more objective way. We're also developing a land use transport model. One of these interactive land use transport models to do this work. And we'll be putting that through some transport scenario development to do some interactive modeling of the effects in probably Melbourne, Australia. We will probably only focus on private autonomous vehicles in our work because that seems to be the one that seems to be affecting most. Thank you, that's me. Our website is ptrg.info. If you want to talk to us, we are on LinkedIn and Twitter, and we run the World Transit Research Clearinghouse and the Researching Transit website. Thank you very much.
Ian actually kind of took off.
That's fine.
To attend the conference.
He was bored. It was too much for him.
Right. So thank you very much as for your insightful research, and also I found it really interesting and fascinating too. I think we're going to have kind of Q&A session from now on. So if you have any question, just raise your hands. We're going to take a question from you for Graham.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. So you can just take a,
be brave. Who's brave? Come on, you can do it. Is anybody here working on AVs?
Autonomous vehicle.
Autonomous vehicle. Yeah, good. Marlo.
Do you have any question about this?
I do have one question regarding value of time. It's a quite new term for me, so I'm kind of confused whether it's the value based on the hour.
Yeah, it's the value of time per hour. Now, it might be a new term, but it's the basis of all transport modeling. Have you ever used a transport model? Transport land use or transport, a four-step model to make predictions of transport use in cities? Well, they entirely work off the value of time. When you built the network model, it skims the trips and it works out how long it takes to get on each of the links. And then that is all converted into a value using the value of time. And then it's the generalized cost of that value. It's what we call time multiplied by its value, which drives the model. And it's based on the BPR. What does that stand for?
BMT, we're talking about? I guess. Vehicle miles travel.
BPR function is one of the functions in the value density.
The value density function.
Okay, which is part of traffic engineering, but its value is an economic term, and that's all transport departments in every city in the world has a value of time which goes into that model that calibrates what that value is, and that is the value of time. When you create a new mode like a light railway in a city that hasn't got it, you've got to work that value of time out for that mode, because that will be different from other modes, and it will end up explaining the usage of that mode, and the same is true for autonomous vehicles. Now, there's many alternative assumptions about that very thing. Our work will all assume that the entire network is autonomous vehicles. No mixture. It's a long-term future where everything's autonomous. Is it a fantasy? Yes. But this is exploratory research. We will not assume mixes of human-driven, and it's a long-term future to establish a likely long-term land use outcome.
Any other questions from the audience? So, Nicole, you have a question?
Hi.
Fantastic talk. So I noticed that the value of travel time is the lowest for the private autonomous vehicles.
Yes.
Do you think it's related to the in-vehicle activities? Because previously it's the driver and then now he can do some work or some later activity inside the vehicle. So that significantly reduced the BOT.
Yes.
But if it's a commuter before, like using the transit a lot, so the value of travel time will change a lot.
Yes.
I don't think the value of travel time will change a lot because they still having the same activity inside the transit.
Well, you're quite correct. Your assumption about why it's lower is exactly the case. People can do other activities. They can do work, or they can do leisure activities, watch television, read a book. Is it going to be different for a transit user who uses autonomous vehicles? Yes, because they'll already have some level of benefit from being able to do other activities when traveling. So the relative change in their value of time will be different from people that didn't do that before. And that's how it works in the real world. That's what drives travel behavior. So these are aggregate averages for the whole market and surveys. And we're kind of looking at the aggregate values for now. But you're quite right, in a study that looks at a market that changes from public transport, train usage, say, to autonomous vehicles, the difference won't be as big because they'll already have some benefits from having been able to do activities when they're traveling. So you're exactly correct.
I have a second question. For the youth and all that, you mentioned that there will be less parking lots for the shared autonomous vehicle. So I was thinking that maybe there will be a lot of zombie autonomous vehicle on the road. That means there are no
Drivers.
passengers.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so people may feel a little bit afraid.
Well, I hope so. I certainly hope so, because this is a crazy, stupid idea that your cities are destroyed by cars. You know, I was in Seoul. It's a great city, but there's too much traffic. Do you not think so? It's just crazy. And the idea that you're going to have more of that traffic, to have cars going down streets with nobody in them, it doesn't make any sense. And then we've got climate change, where we need to have significant reductions in the use of travel and transport. And we're going to actually, you know, if commuters go from their home by car to their work, and then they get their car to drive back home and park, that means for groups of commuters we'll double the amount of travel that they do with cars driving around with nobody in them. You know, I can't believe we'll even allow it. But that is the current likelihood of this technology unless we manage it. To my mind, the idea of the empty relocation of these vehicles on their own is ludicrous, and we shouldn't be allowing it. You know, New York City has banned some shared vehicles such as Uber and Lyft, because those vehicles, although they've got a driver in it, there's no passengers. And a very high share of their travel is actually traveling around looking for work. And they're adding to the kilometers of cars in a very confined area. We shouldn't be allowing more travel with no use. It doesn't make any sense. You're right to think that, will people be scared of these vehicles? It's a good question, because a common way to look at the future is through the media, the entertainment media, that science fiction media, for example, that looks at the future and imagines what it is. And that artistic representation of our future is where we humans explore our future. And that's what science fiction is doing. So I don't know if you've ever seen I, Robot, but what we have is Will Smith being chased by autonomous cars that want to kill him. All right. We've got a lot of movies about autonomous cars, trucks on roads killing horses. And it was deliberately done to get people to be scared of them. So there's actually a common cultural trend at the moment in our media against autonomous vehicles, and that could affect people's perceptions of them. Whether in reality in the future that will change when we see the benefits, I don't know, but certainly our thinking at the moment, I think, is a lot of these things are not worth having, and we should be trying to plan to avoid them.
Any more questions?
Okay.
I think I have one question for you. So you're from Australia, and then reviewed all the comprehensive literature and documentation about the autonomous vehicle. So considering that we are living in the Asian cities, and like if you look at Seoul, Hong Kong, where the high density development happens.
Yes. Yep.
So usually we're talking about how we can interconnect the different types of transport modes in transport hub, and where you can see all the high density mixed land use and mixed diverse activity happen. So do you have any any insightful implication you can think about on the high density cities in Asia, and how these AV development could just bring, I would say, the future mobility?
Yep. Well, it's all speculative
Yes, right.
because we don't have the vehicles.
Right.
But there's a real danger that we create negative outcomes here.
Right.
The great success of Asian cities is to do with density. It's very cost effective. The Asian tiger cities are hugely successful. Shanghai and Singapore, they're successful economically for lifestyle, for living quality. And they're successful because of urban transit. They all have mass transit railways. Ironically, they all have autonomous trains. As I say, today on planet Earth, literally billions of trips are being made in autonomous trains, and the amount of trips being made in autonomous cars in planet Earth, for all the cities on the planet Earth, a few thousand, because they're all technically trial vehicles. There's very little real operations. So we're dominated at the moment by autonomous trains. Could autonomous cars be used in high density Asian cities? A very good use would be first last mile access to stations. Why? Because what we need is to concentrate people in time and space in efficient modes that have got lots of priority, which is trains, metros. But the problem is we haven't got metro stations everywhere, and it would be useful to access the stations by either walking, cycling, or another mode, and that could be, a low speed, like the autonomous buses we have at the moment. The danger is that we try and justify more traffic in those cities by having autonomous cars. Traffic doesn't work in those cities now. We've already seen it's extremely likely to be private autonomous vehicles. I don't see that's a solution. Maybe shared autonomous vehicles, maybe. But as you'll see, the preferences from the value of time, people don't like them as much. Asian cities have many successful features. We should be building on that for the future, not trying to destroy them with more traffic.